Would you let go of a 45-year grudge if it meant finding peace? Thomas never thought he'd get a second chance, until the past came knocking. The letter that changed everything. At 68 years old, Thomas Reed had accepted that his best years were behind him. A retired school principal, he lived a peaceful yet monotonous life, morning coffee on the porch, long walks in the park, and evenings lost in the pages of old books. His days were quiet, predictable. But there was always a lingering weight in his chest. A weight that had been there for 45 years. One ordinary afternoon, as he was sorting through his mail, a particular envelope caught his eye. It was handwritten, slightly aged, and had a familiar name in the return address, James Parker. The name alone made Thomas's stomach tighten. James had once been his closest friend, his brother in spirit, the one person he thought would always be by his side. They had met in college, shared dreams, pulled each other through heartbreaks, and laughed until their stomachs hurt. And then, everything fell apart. It had started with a betrayal. A heated argument over something that, in hindsight, felt insignificant. Harsh words had been exchanged, doors had been slammed, and their friendship, once unbreakable, was shattered. Neither had reached out. Pride had built a wall too high to climb. Now, after decades of silence, James had written to him. With hesitant hands, Thomas opened the letter. Thomas. I don't know if you'll even read this, but if you do, I owe you an apology. I've carried regret for decades, and life is too short to leave things unsaid. If you're willing, I'd like to meet. One last time. Underscore. Thomas reread the words, his heart pounding. A lifetime had passed since they last spoke. He had convinced himself that he had moved on. That the past no longer mattered. But at that moment, with the letter in his hands, he knew he was lying to himself. He had never truly let go. The decision. For the next few days, Thomas wrestled with what to do. He thought about tearing up the letter. He thought about ignoring it. He told himself that some things were better left in the past. But then, late one night, he caught himself staring at an old college photograph. Two young men, arms around each other, laughing as if they had all the time in the world. That's when it hit him, **** time had moved forward, but his heart had stayed stuck in the past. So, after days of hesitation, he picked up the phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the letter. The meeting. They decided to meet at a small cafe in the city. As Thomas walked in, his heart pounded like it hadn't in years. He scanned the room, and then he saw him, James. Older, grayer, but unmistakably the same. James stood up slowly. His eyes, filled with uncertainty, met Thomas's. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, James did something Thomas never expected. He teared up. I thought I'd never see you again, James finally said, voice shaking. Thomas felt the tension in his chest soften. Decades of bitterness, of wasted time, of what-ifs, melted away in that moment. You look terrible, Thomas said, forcing a chuckle. James laughed, a real, deep, familiar laugh. So do you. And just like that, the years between them disappeared. They sat for hours, catching up on everything they had missed, marriages, children, losses, regrets, joys. They spoke about their past, the pain they had caused each other, and the stubbornness that had stolen so many years from them. By the time they walked out of the cafe, the sun was setting. As they shook hands, James smiled. I'm glad I wrote that letter. Thomas nodded, eyes misty. I'm glad I answered. The lesson. As Thomas walked home that evening, he felt something he hadn't felt in decades: light. He had spent 45 years carrying a grudge that no longer mattered. And now, with a single letter and a simple conversation, he had finally let it go. Life, he realized, wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about the moments we still had left. And at 68, he wasn't done making them. Moral of the story. It's never too late to mend a broken relationship. Pride can steal years from us, but forgiveness can give them back. Sometimes, all it takes is one step to change a lifetime.